Hello and welcome to the El Camino Studio. Today we're doing lesson 2 of the ongoing series for the Camino coloring book. In lesson 1 we started off with doing the first page of the coloring book in pencil crayon. This time we'll be doing a watercolor of page 2. The materials you'll need to do this project are a basic set of watercolor paints in the tubes, an assortment of brushes, some paper towels, and a spray bottle for water, which is optional. I tend to work very dry in watercolor, and seeing that this paper is not really a very heavyweight paper, it's important to work as dry as possible in your work. You will also need some kind of a palette. Container lids, plastic of any sort, are a good substitute if you don't have that. As far as brushes are concerned, the basic economy pack of watercolor brushes will be more than sufficient. You have the broad flat brushes around filberts and a few wedges. You should be able to do most anything in these size drawings with a basic assortment, so you don't have to spend a lot of money at brushes unless you really want to do a lot of watercolors. The last thing you'll need to have is a container of clean water. I use a mason crown jar with a screw-on lid, which is very simple. It's important to wash your brushes frequently and keep the water clean so you don't contaminate the colors. So the drawing we're doing today is of the Navarra region on the west side of the Pyrenees, just inside of Spain after we left France. It's very warm colors, so we're going to use the analogous colors of the green and the orange. So we're going to limit our palette to those colors. A color wheel is always a handy thing to have. You can always study and plan your drawing. One more thing, a flat brush like the one I'm showing right now is also handy to have if you do a lot of washes, like doing the large blue sky or fields of green. So it's always good to have a nice flat brush. It doesn't usually come with the economy packs. So if you haven't done watercolors for some time, or this is your first time trying it, it's good to start with a scrap piece of paper and just get a feel and get comfortable with the watercolor. In watercolor, you're always dealing with the white of the paper. You don't use the color white because you're always trying to retain the white brightness of the paper as you paint. So I'm going to mix a little bit of yellow here, and all you're doing is watering it down with water. You water it down quite a bit because watercolor goes a long way and is very strong. So whatever you think you're going to use, how strong you want to use it, cut it in half and try it, because you'll see that very little goes a long way. If you watch closely at what I'm doing, you can see that I'm always slightly overlapping each stroke. It's important not to let any area dry. Once it dries and you start to paint over it again, you'll end up with a lot of lines, watermarks. Unless that's what you're trying to achieve, it will distract a lot from your drawing if you have too many watermarks. When you have a larger area to fill, like I'm doing right now, organize create a little path for yourself on how you're going to color in the section so that you're always being able to keep it under control and keep every area slightly wet. You might have to work in two directions at once, or just continually move in one direction. It depends on the shape and the size of the fill that you have to make. So once you feel comfortable with the watercolor by using one color, get another piece of scrap paper and just do a little bit more of a complex drawing. This way you can introduce different colors. I'm just going to do a little imaginary section of grass. So we're going to start off with, as in most of the drawings I do and the watercolors, we always start from the lightest color and work to the dark, because you can always add but you can't take away. And here I'm going to start off with a cadmium yellow, because I want to, at the end of this, have a mixture of yellow and green to give that this little raised area a different color than the lower section. You'll see as we go along. Because we're always trying to keep everything wet as we go along, you'll find that you're moving along at quite a pace, and you'll cover a large area in a very short time. Don't allow yourself to get bogged down too much in little details of perfection. Just keep on covering the larger areas. The smaller sections, if you miss them, they'll easily be covered up or worked over or covered with the next layer. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. Just keep on moving ahead. And once you finish with the yellow, then you can immediately proceed with the sap green. So right now I'm just doing the lower grass area with the light wash of green. Like we did in the coloring, the pencil crayon drawing, we're trying to always cover and work on the whole picture at once, so that we have a better sense of control and we see where the drawing is going. See, now I've put a little bit of green everywhere, and now I slowly go back and intensify and rework the areas again. Try to limit the amount of time that you go over the same area, especially when it's wet, because the more times that the brush strokes it, the more damage you do to the paper, because the paper is getting softened with the water. So try to work efficiently so you don't have to keep going over the same area too many times. Now that we've got two colors down on our little sketch here, you can see that the whole thing is still rather flat. It doesn't pass the squint test. In drawing, the higher the contrast between the light and dark areas, the more three-dimensional the whole picture is going to look. So now we're going to go back over the areas and intensify the borders between the two objects. And you'll see how immediately that yellow greenish area raises off the paper. The darker green recedes into the background lower. So this could be, I'm intensifying that by creating a shadow. I've been using this little starter kit of watercolor tubes for a while now, and I don't even think I've even opened the black yet. Black is a color that very seldom ever gets used. Most of the shadows, or all the shadows in drawings, are never black. They're always some darker version of the color that of the surface that they're on. So resist the temptation to use black at all. It's most of the time not necessary. So continue now with this little doodle and keep building layers of intensity upon layer until you feel comfortable with it. And it's very mindful, so enjoy the process. Don't rush. Just take your time, do it slowly, and enjoy the process. This also helps give the paper a little bit of time to dry, so you'd end up not saturating the paper. It's very relaxing. It's like doodling when your mind is somewhere else. It's very mindful. Just enjoy the process. So now you must feel a little bit more comfortable with the watercolor, and it's not so intimidating. But if you're still a little unsure, it might be a good idea to try another little doodle. This time, take a little section of our landscape and magnify it, and just try to work on a little section that you've copied. This will give you just a little bit more confidence for when you start the big sheet. So you don't have to do much, just a few pieces of the landscape, so you can practice working with more shapes and more objects. So now we're ready to start our drawing of the Navarre landscape. We're going to be using cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, raw sienna, sap green, and ultramarine. So we have a very limited palette. We're going to start with the yellow cadmium, and we're going to cover all the areas on the drawing that we want yellow or hints of yellow to come through. You're going to have to work at a fairly fast pace because you have a lot of area to cover and you don't want too many water lines, so you're going to try to keep everything wet as you go. I'm using a relatively small brush. If you have a larger one, you can use a larger one. I find the flat brushes are good for getting the contours of the edges easily, because you sort of use the brush like a pencil. The Navarra region of Spain is just on the west side of the Pyrenees. It's Basque country, and it's beautiful rolling hills with endless vineyards and lush greens and beautiful. I walked in the spring. It's just a beautiful area to walk through. I walked through this area on my Camino in the latter part of May, and it still had that lush green spring color to it. And when you're a pilgrim, you end up walking early in the morning. In the morning, the dew is still hanging on the grass and the trees, and everything is still pretty moist. One day I was walking and I realized I was on the wrong path. I could see the proper path I should have been on, which was across a field of very young wheat that was up to probably a little bit above my knees. So I thought, instead of going down and back around it, I decided just to quickly cut across the field and join the correct path. Well, by the time I made it across this field, I was completely drenched up to my waist. My pants were just soaking wet. But after 2 or 3 hours more of walking, everything was dry again. I guess I should have backtracked and walked around it, but what the heck? It's only water. So continue now and cover all the areas in this picture that you want yellow in it, and that's going to take a fair amount of time. It's probably okay to do more areas yellow than you think you need, because this is a very light coating. So that takes us to the end of part 1. There's 3 more lessons to finish with this drawing.